Welcome to another epic immigration battle between some of your favorite countries. Today, we're comparing Chile versus Peru immigration. Which one is better? That's what we're going to find out today. My name is Natalia Rincon, and I am a Research and Development Associate at Nomad Capitalist. When you're looking for that Latin American base, that residence permit, or that Plan B that can allow you to travel to Latin America, there's a lot of things that you need to take into account. Of course, you may have a preference for a certain country, but we're here to talk to you about the facts and some of the things that you need to consider when you're choosing between one and the other. Now, Peru and Chile are widely known Latin American countries, but their residence permit requirements greatly vary. So we're going to compare them, and ultimately you can decide if either of these options is attractive for you. So let's start out with temporary residence. In both of these countries, if you want to obtain a permanent residence, you need to necessarily go through temporary first. So how does it look like for each of them? Well, for instance, in Peru, temporary residence is only issued for 1 year, and you have several options, but the most relevant to us are the passive income visa, the investment visa, and the employment visa. Let's start out with passive income. You can be a rentista or a pensioner and show that you receive a minimum passive income equal to $1,000. But keep in mind that this income must be proven and remitted on a monthly basis to Peru. Now, if you're an investor and you want to inject capital into Peru, you must commit at least 500,000 Peruvian soles, which is equivalent to approximately $135,000 into a new or existing Peruvian company. Plus, you must show that you have employed at least 5 Peruvians into this company. And last but not least, we have the work visa, and this is of course when you have a valid job offer from a Peruvian employer that can lead you to obtain a residence permit. And you must be ready to spend at least 6 months per year in Peru in order to keep this residence active and furthermore renew it. But how does this compare to Chile? Well, first of all, you should know that in Chile, temporary residence permits are actually issued for 2 years, but the physical presence requirements are more strict than in Peru. In fact, if you want to renew your residence permit, you must spend at least 22 out of the 24 months of these 2 years inside of Chile. Now let's talk categories. In Chile, you also have the option to acquire a rentista visa. For Chile, you must show passive income of at least $1,500 monthly in passive income. If this income comes from a pension, you must also be above 55 years old to qualify. The good thing about this, though, is that for both rentista and pensioner, you do not necessarily need to remit this income to Chile, as opposed to what happens in Peru, in which you actually have to. And of course, Chile also has an investor visa, but it requires a much higher capital of at least $500,000 into a Chilean company. Now, for all of these 3 options, the residence permit is issued and valid for 2 years and is renewable so long as you continue to meet the requirements. Now, let's talk about pathways to obtain a permanent residence that you do not have to renew every year or every 2 years. Neither Peru or Chile actually have a pathway to obtain permanent residence straight away. Instead, you must first accumulate a certain number of years of temporary residence in order to apply. When we're talking about Peru, you can actually get a permanent residence after completing only 3 years of temporary residence. And when you obtain a permanent residence, the real perk is that you can keep your residence active so long as you visit at least once per year. So it's no longer 6 months every year, it's just 1 day every year to keep the permanent residence active. Also, once you become a permanent resident, you can work indefinitely in whatever occupation you want inside of Peru. Now, let's talk about how you can obtain a permanent residence in Chile. So there's a general rule and some exceptions. The general rule is that after holding your temporary residence for 2 years, you can immediately apply to get a permanent permit. However, if you have certain ties, such as family, or if you made a really good investment for your temporary residence permit, you can even apply for permanent residence after only 1 year. But in any case, physical presence requirements is always very strict. If, for example, you cannot stay in the country for 11 months a year, but you can only stay, let's say, 10, Then you cannot apply after 2 years, but you have to wait a little bit more. And this amount just increases for the longer absences you have from the country. But once you obtain your permanent residence, this completely changes because you're only required to visit once every 2 years to continue maintaining your permanent residence permit. Now, of course, we as Nomad Capitalists always want to know, what is the path to citizenship? How can you become Peruvian or Chilean? Well, I'm going to sum it up for you. First of all, we have Peruvian citizenship by naturalization. I should say that the Peruvian passport is pretty great. It gives you visa-free access to 142 countries. And you might notice that I am saying legal residence instead of temporary or permanent. The reason why is because according to Peruvian law, you can qualify for citizenship after 2 years of residence, regardless of whether that residence permit is temporary or permanent. There's a catch though. Of course, the physical presence is highly taken into consideration, but you also must demonstrate other kinds of ties to Peru, such as, for example, owning real estate or having a lease agreement, performing economic activity, and, of course, having your family and your children live here as well. All of this will just increase your chances of being approved for naturalization after only 2 years. Aside from that, you also need to keep in mind that there's a citizenship test, which includes a cultural test and a Spanish test. So be prepared for some Spanish questions. I would like to add to Peru that no nationality is officially restricted from applying. So regardless of where you come from in the world, Peru has a place for you. Now let's compare it to Chile. In Chile, you must hold a permanent residence permit in order to apply for naturalization, and you need to wait 5 years. These 5 years are counted from the date that you get your temporary residence permit. So the time that you spend as a temporary resident also counts towards citizenship. But at the time that you apply, you must be a permanent resident. Now, for Chile, there's also no nationality restriction to apply. So this is something that Peru and Chile actually have in common. Regardless of where you come from in the world, if you meet the requirements, there's a high likelihood that you will obtain that citizenship. But what about bringing your family along with you? In Peru, you can bring along as a dependent your spouse, your civil partner, or your children up to 28 years old. This is one of the highest age limits that we can see when it comes to obtaining a residence for your dependents. But if your children are above 18, then you must prove that they are continuing to study and that they are financially dependent on you. Now, when it comes to Chile, the rules are somewhat more flexible. You can include a spouse, a cohabitant, and children up to 18 years old or up to 24 if you can prove that they depend on you and are still studying. But another perk of Chile that Peru maybe doesn't have is that they do recognize same-sex partnerships. So, to wrap up, which option is actually better, Peru or Chile? And then again, of course, everything comes down to your specific situation. If you want a lower investment, but maybe some stricter requirements of physical presence, but a faster path to citizenship, then Peru is your option. But if you want more flexibility or if you are interested in investing a higher amount, go for Chile. They have a much stronger passport. I previously mentioned in this video that with Peru, you can go visa-free to 142 countries. Well, with the Chilean passport, this amount goes up to 162. And it's one of the few countries that only requires an ETA to go to the US for up to 90 days. So as you can see, here at Nomad Capitalist, we take our research very seriously, and we do our best to always stay up to date with the latest trends in immigration, tax, banking, and even investments. If you want to find out more about how we can help you diversify, get a plan B, and of course, go where you're treated best, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, and we can help you create a holistic plan that would cover all of these aspects to get the best lifestyle for you and your family. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on our social media, and I'll see you on the next video.
This is the ultra-luxury side of Bangkok. And showing you the hidden gems of Bangkok. So that you can live like a king.